Hello, kia ora, and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with artists from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Jakic. Hello, my friends. Thank you very much for joining me today. It is really lovely to have you along. This week I'm speaking with Rosanna Raymond. Rosanna, also known as Sistar S'pacific, is in her words an activator fabricator who has achieved international renown for her performances, installations, body adornment and spoken word. Rosanna is an innovator of the Pacific art scene and notable producer of and commentator on contemporary Moana culture in Aotearoa New Zealand, also in the UK, Canada, Australia and the USA. She is a long-standing member of the art collective The Pacific Sisters and a founding member of the SaVàge K'lub. Her body-centered practice includes working within museums and higher education institutions as a researcher, curator, artist, performer, guest speaker, poet, and workshop leader. Rosanna's activations not only expose and critique the colonialism of traditional Western museum practices of conservation, collecting and display, but also propose other methods for keeping culture alive through inherited tradition, personal innovation and embodiment. Rosanna has achieved so much in her long career internationally and in Aotearoa. This episode only just touches on her achievements and all the things she's been involved in, but you will get a fascinating insight into her life and her art practice. We talk about how and when she came to think of herself as an artist, the stories behind the Pacific Sisters and SaVàge K'lub, the work she has done in institutions around the world, and the changes she has seen over the last 30 years in the Pacific arts community. Kia ora, Rosanna, and talofa.
Talofa lava on this very rainy, windy winter's morning.
It's lovely to meet you, Rosanna. I just, I'm in awe of the mahi that you've done over the last 20 or 30 years in Aotearoa, and I'm very privileged to have you on the show. So welcome to the Creative Matters podcast. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the backstories. We're very familiar, or a lot of us are, with a lot of the work that you've done. But to hear more about how it all came about and the backstories to that will be really interesting. So could you please start with Rosanna Raymond as a child?
Oh, my gosh. Rosanna Raymond, little guy. So, born in Auckland, born in Tamaki Makaurau, and in the late 60s, and sort of born in with sort of biracial parents, and sort of which didn't last very long. So then eventually got brought up with my mum, her sisters, and her mum. So actually, I've sort of really have a very strong matriarchal presence, and especially my father, who was born in New Zealand, but his my grandmother's from Samoa, so I spent a lot of time with her. So I think the female matriarchal presence in my life has had a huge impact on me. And we were all the cuzzy bros, all the solo parents of the 70s living in one house with a matriarch with all my cousins and my brother. And so I have really kind of fond memories of that time when we were all in this one big house, and it was like pandemonium.
That's so amazing. And it makes you wonder if that's kind of informed the way that you like to work in collectives now.
You know what? Just as I was speaking that out loud, I was like, oh, is that why I can thrive in chaos? Chaos and lots of love, but also, the dynamics of sisters, which definitely feeds into strong sort of sisterhood sort of collections. But we moved around a lot, actually, my mum and I remember when my mum bought a house in Westmere, and I think as a solo parent in the 70s, and I didn't really understand that until I was much older, how amazing that was. And she was telling me that was at a time when they separated my parents, like, you know, they threatened to take me off her, because back in the 70s you couldn't possibly have a solo parent who worked, you know. So it was just such different sort of attitudes towards women. And I think it's when my grandmother came down and lived in the same house, so that could enable all her daughters to work without this threat of being taken, or their children being taken off them. So it's like, oh, they must have been absolutely horrific. And then the same sort of in trying to buy a house, and she was like, banks wouldn't hear of it, a solo parent wanting to buy a house, even though she had money and she'd saved up, and it was only when her brother came in and you know, that they agreed to give the loan. So I think, you know, it's a really strong woman, really good sense of purposes and what needed. But somewhere along the line, I think I was about 10, we ended up moving to England, because my mum not left me. Mum went on a big tour of Europe with two of her friends for 2 years, and I just stayed with my grandmother. But because we had an extended family, that didn't, you know, you didn't even bat an eyelid. But it definitely. So my mother ended up in England, in the far north of England, and brought me and my brother over. So we had 2 years in sort of the far north of England, which was really actually amazing. Yeah, and then when we moved back to Christchurch. So I spent my adolescence in Christchurch, and I think it had a huge impact on me, because it was sort of, I was away from my Pacific Island sort of family, and Christchurch in the 1980s was sort of an incredibly problematic space if you were a little kind of island kid. And my brother's Māori, actually, so, you know, we really do work and live within all those worlds, because my parents and my mum's, they're up from the far, far north, and which is a stronghold, and somewhere I still consider home is the far north up in Kōrāia. So that's where I go home. I go home there. So Christchurch actually had a huge impact on me, and both positive and negative, mainly negative. I think I couldn't wait to get out of that place. I couldn't wait. But actually, I think it was also the seeds of sort of like, you know, as a creative practice, because it was interesting. You know, I did art. High school, like, I was definitely by then a little kind of like, you know, rebel without a cause, sort of not really knowing what I was pushing against, but kind of just, you know, you unpack it as you get older. But yeah, I had and I went to Burnside High School, and actually Trevor Moffat who was actually he's a really incredible painter and artist, who probably not many people know now, actually, but Mr. Moffat had a huge impact on me, because I remember during the art school, the art classes, you know, he wasn't my art teacher, but, you know, I think we had to draw pumpkins for like a term, and you did liner printing. And of course, so I had absolutely nothing to do with any sort of Pacific Island iconology. There was one other Samoan at my school, and I had, you know, basically a white mainstream sort of Western approach to art that just had nothing to do or any respect for anything that was Indigenous. And Trevor Moffat, who I think recognised something in me that I was pushing against, that sort of helped me sort of through. But it was to come through later on, because basically I left school with kind of, with art being pushed out of me, I think. You know, my mother was really creative. She always loved to paint, and I came all my aunties and my grandmothers were incredibly creative women. They always had something in their hands, and there was crocheting or knitting or painting, and so I think I always carried that within me. But yeah, so when I left school, whatever sort of, I just thought art was basically for dead white people. I'm going to be honest here.
Mm.
And it was something that was in museums or art galleries, and it was for other people from the past, hundreds of years ago. And, so it was Trevor Moffat that really sort of helped me push through that.
Mm-hmm. And helped you connect your culture to your art making.
Yeah, but it was, sort of, those teenage years was still kind of fraught. And then I kind of fell into modelling. Actually, I think my mother got sick of me slouching around with my hair in my face. Kind of sent me to this modelling course. And I did it because but our relationship was pretty fraught by then, a classic mother-daughter relationship, and we sort of, so I started picking up modelling jobs, and by then I was sort of and this is Christchurch in the 80s, so it was actually the music scene was incredible. It was all the Clean and the Bats and
brilliant.
And I was totally it would be those are the sort of parties I went to, and then I'd go up to Auckland, and then I'd be with my Pacific Island family, so I was really living like this kind of definitely sailing between two worlds. And then And then I think at about 18, God, I was young, I ended up going over to Italy. And I did some time in Australia, in Sydney as well, modelling. But it was when I went to Europe, and I did go, especially actually in Germany, because I think there was there was one day where all the museums would be free. And because we were poor, starving models, there was a friend and I, we would always end up in the museums. In the art museums, it's always been my idea of a good time, actually.
Yeah, it goes all the way back.
Yeah, and I think I can pinpoint that to my mother, actually, who would, I have memories of being taken to the Auckland Museum and the Auckland Art Gallery as long as I can remember.
Mm.
So, and I remember seeing our mate Frida Kahlo. I saw one of her, a huge show of hers in Germany. It just blew my mind. I was just completely obsessed, but still completely disconnected from any sort of art practice. And then I sort of went through all the angst of modelling, and then eventually came home. When did I come home? It was at the beginning of the 90s, actually. And by then I'd met Kerry Brown. I always call him my wasband. The wasband came into my life, and he was a photographer and a very creative photographer. And then so we had a space, like a warehouse apartment on the corner of Kitchener and Street, up in the centre of Auckland, and that kind of, I've written a little bit about that because it became like some crazy Andy Warhol factory, where we had parties, and it was all models and fashion people and artists, and then all my crazy friends. So it was and it was another sort of, and a few other people had started to come back from England, so that they were throwing big warehouse parties and dance parties, and then the Planet magazine, which is an incredible magazine that really has got to have some sort of renaissance, because they opened their offices just next to us. And so I started doing a lot of styling. And by then I'd bumped into Greg Semu, who is an incredible artist. And there's I met Nephi Tupaya and Annie O'Neill. So there was all this all the action was happening, all concentrated in High Street then. Because it was 3 clubs. So, but
at that point, was the sort of Pacific Island artist community starting to?
It was at that stage there was sort of fa'u, and kind of even John Pule was just coming up then. This was so fresh. It was really there was Johnny Penosula, but he was down in the South Island. So there was, in terms of kind of contemporary Pacific art, it was a desert.
And mostly male.
Incredibly male. And so when I first met Annie O'Neill, that was my friend was like, oh, you've got to come and meet this incredible young artist. So Annie was just doing her last year of art school, and then I went to her opening, then I went to her 21st actually. Oh my God. And yeah, so it was just mainly, there was who else? Oh God, but these are just so it was just really, it really was a desert, and it was really happening in the streets. It was not happening in the galleries. It was happening in these warehouse parties. It was happening at our, in these small sort of spots, and then it sort of started to spill out. Yeah, and I'd met Nephi at a dance party, and because the Planet magazine was really non-mainstream, it had brown faces in it, and it was which the racism then was still really quite overt. That magazine, a lot of shops and places wouldn't take it because it was a brown magazine.
Really?
Yeah, and actually this is interesting. This is where fashion and art kind of collided, because I was, I still was in the fashion industry, and I was doing a lot of styling for Levi's, and they had recognized that the Pacific Island, like little funksters, had their own scene, and so we were doing these fashion shows, but they were really fun. They weren't anything about walking up and down a catwalk. They were really about expressions of culture and personalities and that. So yeah, and that was ID magazine and Face magazine, and sort of, these are all kind of dinosaurs now, but they're really, and there was days where like it would take a month or 2 months for the magazines to turn up, to be shipped over, or that you might be able to get a new one, but it would have been flown in. It was like, $40, and you're like, you didn't have access to like everything in the world.
It's a different world, wasn't it?
It was a different world. Like, there was no term of urban Pacific then. There was no, it was really different times. It was sort of, but yeah, we all kind of collided in these parties, and then it started to spill out into the fashion shows, and then through meeting people like Annie and Lisa Rayhana, like they had actually been to art school, and we were like, art school? So that was an amazing sort of meld. Yeah, and then Nephi had started this group, the Pacific Sisters. So I met Suzanne Tamaki and Selena Forsyth, and I was, and they were doing the kakahu, the clothing for this extravaganza by Morag Magnolia, and it was, oh my gosh, it was so awesome. I was like, it was, the whole theatre was full of sand. There was live drummers, and
wow.
And it was, and this is sort of before you had access to like multimedia, and she'd like a big screen up showing a something. So it was but that's where I actually met the Pacific Sisters, because Nephi was like, oh, this is the Pacific Sisters, and they knew that I did a lot of sort of kind of these sort of underground fashion shows. So we just sort of collided together and started to work together. And the rest, we should say, is history, because it was...
Yeah, and that is amazing. I mean, the Pacific Sisters, I think everyone in New Zealand has heard of them. It's probably one of the oldest, longest standing collectives, art collectives, and with quite a lot of people a part of it. I guess the people have varied over the years, but to be set up in the 1990s and to be kind of trailblazers in a way is a pretty incredible thing that it's still happening now.
Yeah, we've been able to reflect on that. When Nina Tonga asked us if we would do the show at Te Papa, when she asked us if we would be interested in doing like a retrospective, like our jaws dropped actually, because really we thought nobody had had really taken notice, because we'd sort of, we'd had a huge impact in the 90s. And then she reminded us that she was one of the kids that were growing up watching us do all these sort of shows and costumes and storytelling and bringing our culture along with us. And so she was, I mean, it really amazed us. And actually, I was standing there in Te Papa, and this random guy looked at me and said, "Did this really happen in the 90s? Like it was made up?" And I'm laughing, going, "Yes," because he didn't realise I was a Pacific sister. I was like, "Yes, that really did happen."
Really?
In the 90s.
It probably was quite radical in the 90s in a way.
Yeah.
And you went from fashion to sort of coming together with the Pacific Sisters. And is that when you started to develop, your love for spoken word and using your body as part of a performance art practice?
Definitely.
How did that actually start to develop?
Yeah. Well, when I first came to the Sisters, I was really like more of a producer, like because I was used to organising shoots and working in production. I was what was known as arms and legs, and then would kind of do a lot of the choreography and sort of things. So the Sisters really became this incredible space where kind of it helped me kind of unleash this create, because I used to look at them and I wish I could do that. And it was great. Annie was always one of my greatest teachers. She was really patient, and she taught me a lot of, so we'd sit there, I'm left-handed, so I'm not really a good weaver, but I was, I started to build up all these creative skills. Yeah, so the Pacific Sisters was this incredible platform that helped tease out, well, it was such a sharing space. It was a shared space. We'd come together and we'd be talking and sharing stories, and that's when we really realised all the shared techniques that was throughout the Pacific, because, we had Tongan, Cook Island, Māori, Samoan, so all these different sort of islands. And then we realised a lot of us, we had the same stories, the same oral histories, and the same actual craft techniques. So that, they really sort of helped and taught me a lot of the skills that say my matriarchs never had the patience to do, because I was left-handed. We were sitting in that warehouse that I was speaking out, and we cracked a coconut, and I was like, "Oh, look, the face of tuna, the face of the eel." And that particular story, a lot of us carried. We realised that's when we really realised that we had this story, and it's how the coconut came to the islands. It's this incredible love story between the great eel god and Sina. And Sina is known as Hina, Hine, Ina. So we really unpacked that story, and that was one of the first times I actually sat down and started to make a costume to actually be able to tell the story. So I often say it's like that was when we really would kind of personify all these great sort of, especially wahine, especially women's figures, because, the woman had been written out of most histories, whether it was art or, or warfare or, and then, through the missionaries and completely clothed our bodies. So, now I know we were like, decolonizing ourselves, but even that term was new back then.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't have Linda Tuiwai Smith's decolonizing methodologies there. And that came at the end of 1998 or something. Like, this was early, we were just really, but yeah, we were actually decolonizing our vision, our bodies, and in doing so, telling the stories that we could sort of see ourselves in. So we could see ourselves in these incredibly strong women that you found all through the Pacific. So that was, I think the first one I did was actually called Ganangania, and it was this patchwork tupper jeans and jacket, and it was sort of, we did a lot of shows with that.
You went from those warehouse days to then sort of becoming a lot more public, and was that when you were starting to see yourself as an artist?
Look, it took me a long time to see myself as an artist, actually. And I think that is because I think, the Western framework of what art is really kind of defines certain practices. It's painting, it's sculpture, and even photography is not still finding a place within the arts hierarchy.
Yeah, it's true.
Let alone if you're crafty, I mean, then it's just decorative arts.
Yes, although that I feel like that is improving.
I think so too, and I think that is definitely because there's especially here in Aotearoa where we've got such a strong Indigenous presence. I think it's helping to kind of disrupt the hierarchy of what's been fed to us from Europe and what is sort of, and that's what a lot of us were doing. So it wasn't until actually somebody bought something of mine that I sort of even dared to kind of think that maybe I could be an artist. So, it was really, and I suppose especially because I hadn't come through art school. I was self-taught. I always used to call myself arty by association. But we had amazing mentors. Lisa Rayhana, what a gal, what an incredible visionary. And we were just so, we're all quite a tight group, and it was sort of, that real meeting of minds. And that's why I always look at, when the days in Paris when you hear about, all the surrealists or the other words I can't remember, they'd all, hang out on Montmartre and be cool and stuff. And I think that's kind of what we did. We just did it in K Road and High Street.
Yeah, which is so cool. Very cool.
That's right. And so I think that power of the of collective is really sort of really helps then. But it's really something that I don't teach through the art schools. The art schools to me, it's still quite an individualistic practice that they sort of look at. So time. So I'd kind of been drawing a lot and sort of, I sort of became by default the spokesperson for the Pacific Sisters. And so I'd started to play with words as a way to articulate sort of some of my works. And that too comes through our oral histories, and that's an art form. And I really started to look at what was art. But I still didn't dare to think that I was an artist. It was actually the National Gallery of Victoria that bought one of my first works. And that was through a show out at St Heliers. And there was it's still there, I think, an art centre out there. And I think Giles Peterson, who's now a tutor at the White Cliff Art School, he's done a lot for a lot of artists. And he would have these really small shows that would, right out of the centre. But, through that, the National Gallery of Victoria approached me to buy one of my I didn't even know how to price it.
Yeah, and was that a costume?
Yeah, it was like a patchwork tupper jeans and jacket.
Oh, right, the one you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, and it was cool.
Yeah, how amazing. And that was early days, wasn't it, really, for you? It
really was early days. And, and I remember sort of, because, I didn't even know where to start with pricing. And it was just so early days, and we all kind of got together and tried. Yeah, so again, it was like we had people like Annie O'Neill and Lisa who really had been in the actual gallery system that really helped us.
I guess that was your first sort of connection with an institution like that, and that, the first of many connections through your life. So it must have felt quite strange to be connecting with an institution like that was probably quite far from what you knew.
Especially, and for Australia as well. And I remember writing them. I found it actually a couple of years ago. Like there's this hand, because we all faxed back then. So I hand wrote this letter that said that that they might have been buying the garment, but the garment came with a body, and the body was what gave it the modi, and that this is really something that needed to be conserved, and that at some stage I would be back to bring those garments back onto a body and back into the world of the living. And I didn't realize then I basically set the seeds for my master's that I did a couple of years ago, and that kind of set me on this huge journey with working with museums and institutions and how they were to interact with what I was actually selling. And it took me a long time to actually think what I was selling too.
Yeah. And that idea for you of work sort of getting put into the back closet and not sort of being able to kind of stay alive, that bothered you, didn't it?
It totally bothered me. It was a real issue. And it was like, so when was that? That would have been just in the middle of the 90s or something, that I sold that. And then actually I ended up going to live in England. So I lived in London for the next 16 years. And that's when I didn't have a collective to lean on, and I was just by myself. And it took me a long time to learn how to even work by myself. And I didn't realize I was a natural born nerd, because I started to go in, but I knew the museums were there. I knew they had lots of our beautiful taonga and miasina. So I started to go in, research and read through books and do sort of, I didn't realize it was called a research-based practice back then, but that's what I developed. And the museum sort of collections became my teachers. And again, they were teaching me techniques and they also, what an inspiration to be connected to, like some of the first beautiful sort of, and the diversity of our artworks that were, called objects. So, and that's when I really built up this, without a body, these things that usually are on a body just lay dormant. It's like we've essentially euthanized them and put them into this really dormant state, and that they needed us to come and sort of to activate that VAR, that space that happens between people and things and people and the creator and all things that are created. So in Samoa, we have the concept of the VAR. And so this concept really helped me with museums to articulate that these are cultural practices and deserve the same mana as their own cultural practices inside museums, especially with conservation, like the whole don't touch, don't look, and put it away in the back so nobody sees it, because they're conserving it for the next generations. But actually, because none of us generations get to see it, really, I said, you've just conserved it to death, basically. And that whole look at ownership and what that is, whereas, we look at more as kaitiakitanga in terms of it's really you're just the guardian, and it's to help share it through the communities.
You have been working ever since then, really, in and out of different museums and institutions, haven't you? And can you see any sort of improvement with the way these cultural sensitivities are dealt with?
Absolutely. That relationship, like the difference between when I first went inside a museum space and even the way I was talked to. And then, of course, because it is like a relationship, you've got to get used to somebody, you've got to trust them, you've got to work at that relationship. So I really, I think that's why the VAR was such a useful terminology for me, because it was so that they could understand what I was doing. But some would go kicking and screaming. Some it took them a long time to really sort of shift that power base from the Western, where the Western framework put the mana on, and where, say, the Polynesian sort of framework of kaitiakitanga, of manaakitanga, of whangaungatanga, of allowing the and even in the words object, and I was always like, well, object's one part of a whole, like it's a taonga, it's a miocena, and that has oral histories, it has families, it has genealogy, it has geographical spaces that it would once move around. So it sort of, all that got ruptured when it went into the museum space, or gets put on display as an object with a really, like, it's 5 inches by 3 inches with a made out
Yeah.
of wood, feathers and stone. Not even make it unknown, just Fiji.
Yeah. Oh. And in a glass case often.
Yeah, in a glass case. So and it took, and I was really lucky that I was there. I was there for 16 years. So 10 years out of that would have been working in those spaces, sort of. And it started off as my own curiosity to be connected to the collections and to learn from them. Then I realized it was all these other aspects that needed to be involved. And that's where I sort of started to develop this concept of the VÀ body and what a body does and what it can do when it's inside those sort of spaces, and how we take that modi that we've activated, that cosmological life force, and how we bring it into the now, into the present, and also into the future by being inspired and making new works and bringing it out into the world of light. So it's and it's kind of it's a space that I really hang out in now, and I never would have thought that the museum space would be such a space of inspiration, of creative inspiration.
Do you feel like you're bringing the Pacific Island stories to these institutions?
Absolutely. And I think I made them realize every time they engage with an artist or a cultural practitioner or community member, that they're actually, that it's not just like a, thank you for transaction, not like some, commodity-based transaction, that it's, these really have deep meaning for us, and that it's not just, and we're offering them our expertise as well. And so they're learning and we're learning, and it's hugely impactful, and it's actually, it's a lot of Indigenous cultures, especially the First Nations in Canada. I've realised I was working in the same way as some artists over there. So, you realise, I'm not in a vacuum here. The same with our Australian mob. So, and actually in all the different histories, like, the African sort of works have got so much, so much pain, and a lot of stolen, and I think a lot of people here, they go, our stuff was all stolen. And it's like, well, actually not all stuff. If you look into it, you find all these relationships, and that they were gifts, they were exchanged. But then, okay, so my issue was, how do we keep that exchange going? So it really, you get to really look at our histories properly, rather than just assume it's all negative and it's all stolen and it's all, so it's, case by case.
Yeah.
Literally.
And I have read that you said that you wish New Zealand was more open about the institutionalized racism that exists there. So how do you feel about that, and how did you manage that when you were working within those places?
Yeah, definitely build up a tough skin, I must say. And I think actually, and that's where I think the power of being in a collective really helped me, because, we could take those knocks together and sort of learn as a group. And so that really gave me a lot of sort of confidence to actually, especially in England, especially when I really am in the heart of our the motherland. So that was, and also kindness and grace. I've always, is a lesson that I got taught really young, and also, there's so many different forms of activism. It's not all in the streets with a placard, that there's other ways that you can, and especially when if you really, these institutions close up really fast. So I knew that wasn't going to work. So it was definitely something, but as I said, I remember some of the ways I got talked to back then, and it was really, I had to use all my kindness and grace not to push back, but I found ways through my art practice to actually respond to that. And I think that was through the poetry and the spoken word, because that's where that all seems to come out. It's like, yeah, and that spoken word of mine, it's actually got me around the world. It's always, and it's sort of something I must treasure more. And a lot of people here don't know me as, but like a lot of people in Europe and in England, they know me as the spoken word artist. But I always go, that's all part of our oral history sort of way of telling stories. I'm telling, in this spoken way, but then of course you tell it with your body too, and it's in your movements, and it's what you put on your body, and so that's how we built. And then I was starting to get frustrated with that. Oh, when are you going to perform? And you're not performing, you're actually you're rendering ceremony, and of course anthropology becomes a performance of culture and all this. So it was really starting to look at ways we could find new words and new ways of, and that's why I talk about, if you read a lot about my work, I talk about activating spaces. And of course I put the VAR, there's a VAR in there, so I put that in capitals.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, because I'm really, I'm sort of, for me, when I'm activating a space, bringing this VAR body into the space with all that thousands of years of genealogy, whether it's Samoan, Tuvaluan, French, Irish, I'm bringing that all to the table, and that's allowing, that the past to be in the present. We are the ancestors of the now. So when you start looking at yourself like that, you start looking at what the body can do in a really different way. And when you bring that body in and you're activating, a lot of times through ceremony, that past, present, future, it's more than a performance. It's more than a performance of culture. But also I'm an urban being. I'm an urban kid. I'm a 90s kid. I'm a hip hop kid. I'm a drum and bass kid. So that's informed me just as much as sort of the past. So it's trying to bring those places together where they can stand together and share the same space and just be. So when I'm activating a space, I'm bringing all those things into the space, and then you've got to really close that space too, because you really are opening up to.
And when you're in those spaces, is it ever just you, or even in London, did you find people to work with, so it was more of a collective based?
Well, yes. Well, I spent a lot of time with Ngāti Rānana over there, the tribe of London, and they've been going for over 50 years. And I think that's when I was really like, they wanted you to perform, and if you didn't turn up in your pew and your thing, then it wasn't real. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, we got an issue here. It's been so defined. They couldn't tell the difference between, a performance and a ceremony. It was just all the same. And, that's just education. But you do get tired of consistently putting things into context. But yeah, and actually that's when I started in 2010. I started the SaVàge K'lub, put the old VAR in the SaVàge, and that was and has been now another huge part of my life actually. And probably people ask me what the difference between the Pacific Sisters and the SaVàge K'lub is, and I mean, I actually always go, there'd be no SaVàge K'lub without the Pacific Sisters. It's where I learned how to be in a collective. But I think the SaVàge K'lub sort of, we're much more in those institutional spaces, and we really look at the relationship as much the work of art as the thing on the wall.
And that's mostly performance-based work, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's very performative, but again, it's we create things that go on our bodies that then can go on walls. So it's how how these things they can be they can be a high art, or they can be something that walks down the street. And I think I've carried with me my whole life, about how something, depending on the context, changes. And I suppose actually the Dada movement is a great movement that taught me a lot in terms of that. It was a Duchamp and his,
and artists working together in that way with something that was quite new and forward thinking, wasn't it, at the time?
And so I suppose it's sort of, going back to the Pacific Sisters, it's like it's so interesting, I suppose, now that you can reflect on 30 years, that was once something that was so like, oh, we got told all sorts of things. We were inauthentic, we weren't this, we weren't that, and now it's actually quite normal.
Yeah, it's very much accepted and it's part of our cultural society, or our artistic society, you'd like to think. And the SaVàge K'lub, I've heard you talk quite a lot about the origins of the SaVàge. You've got the VÀ in there, as you said, but also drawing on cultural stereotype and decor, I guess, of historical gentlemen's clubs, which is a nice juxtaposition. How did you come up with that, very briefly? And then how did you run that alongside other commitments with your museum work and the Pacific Sisters?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it was great because actually I was doing a residency at the Museum of Art and Anthropology in Vancouver, and I was doing my little nerd self. In fact, there's a term for it I've since found, indigenerd. I was indigenerding. I'd say, looking at this particular collection, so I'll go in, find a particular collection. I'm pretty ethnocentric, so it's usually Samoan, and it's usually based on something you put on the body and bark cloth, because I love all the patterns. So I saw that there was this name kept cropping up, and then I saw that, well, I had his private diaries that I was looking through. Yeah, and there was this thing called the SaVàge K'lub, and I remember laughing my head off, going, SaVàge K'lub? What is this? So, Google, and then I realised it's been going for hundreds of years, started in London, as a bohemian sort of group of artists that would come together and eat, drink, and be merry. And I was like, oh, fabulous! I can do that. And but then I realised it was men's only, and that they appropriated quite inappropriately Indigenous sort of regalia, and then that they'd been all through the Commonwealth. So then I realised New Zealand had actually some of the most SaVàge clubs like in the whole world at one stage.
Really?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So now me and dates are not good, but I think it's about 1856 it started in London. Only about 20 years later, they started a club in Wellington, and I think it was 1876.
Wow.
So that's pretty fast for back then, right?
Yeah.
But by then it'd become quite elitist. It was all, and it was men's only. And then there was I think there was 18 or so clubs throughout New Zealand. They got so popular, they formed the orphans clubs. And they would come together and use art to fundraise. So, I mean, on the surface, it's a great thing. It's just because it was so men's only and so culturally inappropriate. In the end, I was like, oh, look, actually, I don't care what they do. I'm going to do this. So
You're going to take that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to, and they're quite secretive, so it's really hard to see what's inside. But there was one in Wanganui, and they had some gig that I found out, so I got myself in there, and the decor just blew me away. It was just like, it was my eye is real. What do they call it? Salon style, and it's like,
yeah.
And because there's a lot of artists, they do a lot of caricatures. So there's like kind of lots of Pākehā men in pew, like with a cauldron of boiling water, with some guys in it, with welcoming you to the club. So I was just like, I was beside myself with laughter. So it really, but it's sort of like the actual aesthetic of what a club room is what a based it on. So, but before I'd been actually asked to do a big club room, we did a lot of street stuff. We just actually literally, I'd call up, say, okay, get your regalia on and meet me at this park. And then we'd do a photo shoot and be fabulous and go have some fun. But I got invited to do a SaVàge something at the APT8, the Asia Pacific Triennale in Brisbane. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe we should do a club room. Like, what would our club room look like? Like, because we've got a lot of stuff and things too, and we've got our own regalia, and we're all makers and we're all artists. We all make things. So I curated that space based on that SaVàge K'lub that I'd seen in Wanganui, visually hectic. Like there's like virtually not a space in the, and that has become one of our kind of visual kind of marks that you don't usually know where to look. But we have the portrait wall, all those men in their portraits. So I was like, well, we've got a lot of photographers, so that is something that we try and do in honour to celebrate an occasion. We do our portraits and we get dressed up in our best. And it's, and it's a club room though. It's a place where we hang out in. So it's always got lounges. It's got places that you can, squab so you can like lie down on the walls. And it really just reflects we've got a lot of moving image.
I was watching a video. I'm not sure what event it was, where it was. It might have been what you were just speaking of, actually. And you had the whole space was created. Well, the club room was created into that, and so everything is sort of highly decorated, as you said. And then there were quite a few different people coming in and out and singing or speaking, and all sort of bodies were adorned beautifully. And that's where you had that amazing dress with your bum out the back and your tatau, which was just really striking and very unusual to see, isn't it? Which is so good. And also you often have your breasts out, which I have discovered are called susu in Samoan, which is the best word ever for breasts, yes. Susu. So that I just found that quite fascinating because it's something that you really see in an institution especially, but in general, especially, from women. So can you talk a little bit about that and why it is that you like to go there and I guess push some boundaries for some people?
Yeah, so I have the collective practice is a space. I think my friend called me radically inclusive, which I totally love. And yeah, so this SaVàge K'lub and the Pacific Sisters is this, well, especially the SaVàge K'lub, where I really create spaces where everybody can show themselves. But yeah, my actual own personal work and my kind of I'm known as Sistar S'pacific, and that is really where I've really, body sovereignty is really big for me. And I think actually it probably goes back to being a fashion model and also a young Polynesian body too, so the Polynesian body was completely constructed by the West, especially in its sexualization. You get Bougainville and you get Cook, and they all write about, these sexually free, nude woman of the Pacific. And, a young Pacific Island woman really are brought up under that gaze, under that expectation. And it's something that, was kind of lost in translation, in terms of especially of the bared breasts. It was hot, it was not sexual, and and I think then becoming a model too, your body becomes a commodity based and it often sexualized. And I think that was my way of sort of processing and actually getting my body back and in its pure creative state. In Samoa, if you are tatau, if you carry the malu or the pe'a, then you're considered clothed. It's and I always go, I'm clothed in ceremony, and And actually, there was a legend within the Pacific about the Pacific Sisters that we would perform nude. Now, we never performed nude, ever, like ever. And actually, I remember thinking about it one day because it had become such a myth that I was like, well, I might as well do it. But I did it in such a way it made people feel so uncomfortable. They did not know where to look. And I realized the power of a female body when it's not sexually available.
Yeah.
When those susus aren't pert and sort of, they're sort of hanging down and there's big wads of like rolls and people don't want to look at a nude body when it's like, oh no, please no. And so for my own personal practice, I think I really, and I was photographing my body and then also, trying to go back to a time where it wasn't sexualized, and it's a long journey because people, they can't help their conditioning. But I've always gone, now if you get turned on, it's your own fault. I mean, it's not my problem.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky you. It's just like, but it's not, it's not. And usually, when there's a living, breathing sort of body in front of people, it's more confrontational. It's different for when you're gazing at it in a painting or in a photograph or in a magazine. It's a different experience, and I realize there's real power in that.
Yeah, there is.
So that the backhand maiden, who she's got the Edwardian dress on at the front, so she's real late, she's been colonized, but that's why I wanted to, so like the back is cut out because that is definitely in our culture too, to show one's ass is really confronting. It's really saying you're getting ready for war if you get to see somebody's ass, it's a message. So I cut the back out so that, she was a lady colonized from the front, but, decolonized from the back.
And then you've got your beautiful tatau patterns on your butt cheeks, which are stunning. Yeah, and
they're actually usually sort of associated with the male sort of thing. So I'm really playing with gender too, because, I am a very gender fluid creature, and actually it's sort of, now we've got all the language for that. Whereas we didn't have that sort of language. And that's when I looked at the genealogical body as this, if you're all genetic material, at some stage you're male and female. So I was really looking at these ideas, but in my own body, and it's the way that my own people read me too. They go, like I don't have to tell them. If they see my markings and they can understand, but I also carry the malu, which was a beautiful journey with my brother, which I'm still like, I feel privileged to wear my ancestral, the mana of my ancestors on my skin. So when we go inside those institutions, it's especially back then, there was always at some stage get pulled aside, and that they'd have the conversation about nudity, and I really actually started to push back at them, and especially when you're in institutions that are filled, like the Met, there's filled with like, I lost count of how many penises, bottoms, susus. It's all right to look at it in there, but then you get a human figure, and it's like, oh no, you can't do that.
That's so true.
Yeah, so I'm really challenged them on their, please define nudity, because in my culture, it's I'm actually never naked.
And
then why is it hard for you to deal with a human body? What have we become that affected by our sexualized, hypersexualized now world? So so I'm just trying to normalize it, and it really is normal now. Like our last big one, we didn't get in trouble for the nudity. That didn't even blink an eyelid. We got in trouble because we had a Palestinian flag and ceasefire slogan.
Really?
Yeah, and so we got censored on that, but not the body. The body had finally, they're like, it's just Rosanna's susu. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. Finally, it's normal. Like, it's, So yeah,
But
so
still
now,
a way to go with the other views.
that's exactly right. So it's like, so, because we're putting out some really strong messages that things that we stand for, things that we believe in, and art's such a great way that you're able to do that. That maybe, as I said, activism comes in all sorts of forms. And if it's on a T-shirt, walking down the street, or if it's in a wall of T-shirts we did it, Jamie Waititi and Nat Lind, took all our activist T-shirts that we wear all the time and turned them into a wall hanging, because we're laying our foundation that this is what we stand for. We're standing up for Indigenous rights. We really do believe in ceasefire and free Palestine, but but with love, not with, not at the expense of the other. It always gets turned into a binary. It's, if you do that, then you're against that. So
And it's part of your story.
yeah, so you're always working with it in institutions, especially this was at the National Gallery of Australia. So you're always dealing with these institutional sort of kind of frameworks, and sometimes you got to push. I always believe you push gently, and it's a series of negotiations, but they need to have an understanding, and so do you. So it swings and roundabouts, and we came, and they did it nicely too, and I was really appreciated that. So in terms of how we censored it and how we move forward with it, but it's definitely it's something that's a good 20 years of being inside institutions. Back in the days I would have been still full of the anger and that kaha, but and when and I've always come to go, well, we've been taught as guests what it is to be manuhuri. When you're coming into somebody else's space, you're coming into their homes, into their rules. But then how to find that space where you can land, together as a good host and as a good visitor as well. And I do look at going into those spaces like that, because they're very different to just working in a gallery, especially a commodity-based gallery, I don't know, say Bergman's or Tim Melville's or something.
Yeah.
Those are commodity-based spaces, and I don't have a commodity-based art practice. God damn it. I've got it started to realize where things like, how do you earn a living off if you're a performance-based artist?
Yeah, I was actually wondering that. Is it, are you paid to create something with your collective or as an individual, and then you create it with that money?
Yeah, it's hard.
It's really tough.
A lot harder. So that's why collectives are not for the faint-hearted, because a lot of times those institutions, they'll give you the same artist fee as an individual. They'll give it to the collective, and then as a collective we have to decide whether we're going to engage in that, and then usually you have to go find outside funding, and then because there's so many stages now, because finally Creative New Zealand have over the years realised that they need to help fund the actual development of the idea. Before they would just kind of fund the end game,
the product.
The product. But without all that research and development, you don't get to that beautiful end point. And so that back in the days was really hard, because you'd already done hours of unpaid work before you even could apply to make the thing that you've just spent 3 or 4 months or sometimes years doing the research on, so that you can just do that. So then add a collective in there, and then all of a sudden, every time you move, you can't do anything for under 30, 40 grand.
Yeah. It must be so tough. And then the whole dynamic of a collective, it sounds such a beautiful concept, but I imagine like any group of people working together, there can be challenges.
Oh, absolutely. You know, humans are humans, and aren't we divine, interesting people? And, you know, and then of course, you're always going through different phases of your life too. Sometimes you're focused on a family, sometimes you're focused on a relationship, sometimes you have to go out and work 9 to 5 because, you know, we can't, because the art can't fund the full-time practice. So all those things come into a line. And you know, the Pacific Sisters, we always was like, money was never a reason why we wouldn't do something. It was, you know, but it certainly helps.
Yeah.
And it, you know, and especially it affects the choices you make and what materials you use and how you even display it, you know, and you start getting to the point where, you know, like the installation costs alone for the last SaVàge K'lub was tens of thousands of dollars, you know, and I was lucky that I was in an institution that could hold that they have the facilities, the technicians. So it's sort of, even though on paper it's like 20-30 grand, that's sort of incorporated into the infrastructure of the institution. So, and these are things young artists probably aren't really, they're not really in a position to have that, you know. So you may have these huge ideas, but you can't, you know, and then your reality is you got a $1,500 budget, which kind of is like big in New Zealand. That's like, sometimes people go, oh, why don't you do one in New Zealand? And I'm like, because actually we actually don't have even the technical and the facilities that and the institutions that can actually even hold that.
Or the money.
Yeah, because they haven't got the money to do that. So it really affects the sort of the work. But yeah.
But you're amazing how you've been part of these incredible collectives that have been so successful. I mean, you know, for somebody from New Zealand thinking, how am I going to get international? You've just put yourself out there with residencies, and you know, you get invited often around the world to speak or to perform. How have you made that happen?
That's a really good question, especially for any young artist who's sitting here in New Zealand today, in Aotearoa today, because, I mean, my international practice, I feel like it wouldn't be where it is today if I hadn't have got out. I mean, bottom line, I was in London for 16 years. For the first 3 years, nobody knew who I was, and they certainly didn't give 3 flying foxes either, you know, because it's so competitive. We think it's competitive here. Wow. You know, so I had the advantage of being in, you know, by the 5th year, I kind of knew I had fumbled my way around, but then I found a space where I felt comfortable and I could work in. But it still took probably another, you know, 3 years after that people really started to know. So it's really, you've got to be in it for the long game, and you've got to be ready to invest in your own career, whether it's Creative New Zealand or whether it's through you selling. Like we all sold jewellery. That's how we started our initial fundraising, small works that led into the bigger works. And then, once I was in London, I mean, that opened my world up to Europe. So I started to work in Paris and Germany, in New York, in Canada.
And how did that happen? Were people seeing what you were doing and inviting you, or were you approaching people?
Definitely. It was, I'd say, persistence and resilience. I did a lot of self-funding because I didn't, Creative New Zealand didn't want to know about me. Oh, but you're in England, Rosanna. Honestly, this time I've been in tears because I didn't even know how I could, and I'd be in a group show. I was in a group show with Lisa Rehana, Yuki Kihara, and George Nuku, and Rosanna Raymond. And Creative New Zealand funded the other two, but not me and George, because we lived in there. And it was only through the generosity of those two artists who gave us some of their fee that we could actually, and I didn't ask for travel, I didn't ask for shipping. All I asked was to print my photos. I'd spent 6 months developing the ideas and making the costumes, and then to be told no on an international platform broke my heart.
Well, it's really short-sighted, isn't it?
I thought so at the time. That was in 2009. And I know that through my experiences and feedback to them that they are now opening up, like they're doing things like there's an inter-island collective over there that they've funded who are based over there, because we've become the ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was just like, it was really through digging into the community, showing up, all the things you do, you're creating your own community. And mine became the museum community, and doing talks and then meeting international people and then them bringing me over. And then, of course, you do one and then you start to do others, and and that's why your reputation, it does precede you, So, I am good to work with. I do reply to my emails. I can send you a CV. I can send you a bio. I can, and these things matter overseas. Like New Zealand, I find we've got a bit more of an elastic sort of attitude towards responding to emails. Man, you learn fast, especially somewhere like in London, because if they have to send you 3 emails, they ain't got time for that.
Yeah,
and they've got 50 people behind you that can and are willing to take that space. So, yeah, it was good training ground.
And having good images of your work,
Actually, that surprised me too. Like, since I came back, while I was in England, I always maintained my relationships with the homeland. And actually, good old Facebook did that. I mean, I haven't been on Facebook for like years now. But without Facebook, I wouldn't have been able to see what was going on over here. And I kept looking over here and going, wow, look at all this amazing stuff happening. I was going, wow, this is so exciting what was happening over here in Aotearoa. And that was a big part of my decision to come back, because I got FOMO. I wanted to come and hang out.
And it does feel like in the last, I guess, 5 or 10 years, something's changed. Pacific and Māori artists seem to have a stronger platform. It could probably still be improved, but there's places like Bergman Gallery and, amazing Pacific Island artist collectives, and it just feels like it's gaining momentum and strength within the New Zealand art world.
Yeah, like, when I talk about in the 90s, like, maybe John Pule would show, or Fa'uwha'u, or, there might be like 4 gigs in a year, and now there's like 4 things in a week.
Mm-hmm.
So our community has really grown and blossomed, and they're really sort of finding their ways, using art as a way to, I always go to medicate. Part of our self-medication, I think, is the art practice, because it just allows us to say all these things that might be quite hard to say otherwise. And then and there are definite sort of art loops, and now, of course, with all the kind of like biennales and triennales, and we've had people like Shigeyuki Kihara really opening out the way, Brett Graham, Mata Aho. There's some real champions that have been out there and it's all decades. It's why I always laugh with the Pacific Sisters, our overnight success after 30 years. Yeah. And it really seems like that. So I think it's you're in it for the long game. I think if you're in it to make a quick buck and think that's going to work, and also here we hit the artistic market ceiling quite fast. There's only so much of people that can buy your work. There's only so many institutions that can buy your work, and actually Australia kept me alive last year, and I was really very grateful. Yeah. Also quite sad at the same time that, I haven't had a show in New Zealand for years. Not since I first came back as Rosanna, as Sistar S'pacific. The sisters we've been doing a little bit, and the SaVàges we do little bits, but it's quite hard to sustain an art practice full time here in Aotearoa. So we've all got little jobs that keep us going, and that's.
You must feel really proud that you have been, you and the various artists that you've worked alongside and worked with have been such role models and such trailblazers, like I said, and I'm sure that you've been part of that change.
Yeah, it's like funny, age is a wonderful thing, isn't it? I mean, not that I'm saying I'm ancient, but I'm feeling like it. But yeah, when you've got 3 decades to reflect on, it's, and by now I know what I'm doing now. Like, the first 10 years, I don't know, I was floundering around. I was also a parent. And then that second decade, that was when I was in London, and that was great because it helped me. That really helped me sharpen my knife.
Yeah.
And these are all skills they do not teach in art schools. This is what you learn through experience, and if you're smart, you don't have to relearn too much again and again.
Yeah, that's right. You do learn from experience, and that is the great thing about being a bit older. You and I were born in the same year, 1967.
It's a great
Good year. Well, we are going to wrap up because I know you're very busy and you've had quite a bit on in the last few days. So I won't take your time any longer, but I would just like to say that I think of you as a real Aotearoa legend, and you have done so much, I think, for our art world and can inspire other people coming through. You've got so much that we could talk about. We actually probably need all afternoon to actually speak about all the things that you've achieved. So I'm sorry not to be able to touch on everything, but you are a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, acknowledging your contribution to the arts. You are incredible, and thank you very, very much for sharing some of your stories and giving us a bit of an insight into your incredible life. So kia ora, thank you so much for all your mahi and your amazingness and for being a guest on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. It was like, I still get a surprise when people are interested, so thank you.